has visited his people. Alleluia, 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 alleluia.
I want to start today with a little story that I came across and found it pertinent. It seems that Death was walking toward a city one morning, and a man saw Death coming and said, "What are you going to do?" Death replied, "I am going to take 100 people." "That's horrible," the man said. "That's the way it is," Death said. "That's what I do." So the man hurried to warn everyone he could about Death's plan. As evening fell, the man once again met Death. The man said, "You told me you were going to take 100 people. Why did 1,000 die?" "I kept my word," Death responded. "I took only 100 people. Worry took the others." Worry is and always will be a fatal disease of the heart, for its beginning signals the end of faith. The moral of the story says, release the regrets of yesterday, refuse the fears of tomorrow, and receive instead the peace of today. So today's readings show us different types of fear and anxiety and worry. In our first reading from the book of Job, we get a little taste of God's response to Job. I'm sure some of you are familiar with the story of Job, maybe not all. It's a great piece of sacred scripture. It's a beautiful story with a wonderful lesson. It talks about human suffering. To paraphrase the story, in short, Job is a wealthy guy. He's very well-to-do. He has everything someone could want. He has family, he has wealth, he has property, he has possessions, he has esteem, he has honor in his city. He's got everything going well. Like many of us, he has been blessed abundantly by God. So the story continues on that God and Satan are having a discussion about Job. And Satan says to God that, Job is only faithful to you because you have blessed him so much. I think it would be different if he wasn't so fortunate. Satan even says, he predicts that if he didn't have all this stuff, Job would even curse God. So God says, okay. He makes a bargain with him. He allows Satan to have his way with Job, and we'll see what the end of the experiment would be. How would Job react? So one thing at a time, Job loses everything that he had. He loses his possession. He loses his wealth. He loses his family. He loses his health. He's left alone, sick and heartbroken. It leaves him with nothing. So naturally, Job doesn't like this. He's anxious. He's anxious about his change in life. And he gets angry, and he calls out to God, and he says to him, "Why would you do this to me?" And God responds to him. He doesn't directly answer him, but he gives Job some things to worry about. And that's where our first reading is today, when he talks about the sea. But God says to Job, and this is somewhat what he says, it is an exact quote in the scripture, but he says to Job, "Who are you to question me? Were you around when I created all things? Do you know how the sea works, how the sky works, where the wind comes from and where it goes? Did you create all the animals of the earth?" God makes his point, and he asks Job, "Where is your trust?" Job realizes in the end that it was wrong to question God. And he does not curse God. And at the end of the experiment, Satan is defeated. Job regains a lot of the things he formerly had and lives a life in peace and in harmony with God. But this happened only after he was reminded of God's great wisdom and God's power. So this gospel reading is certainly a beautiful one. It's one of the most stirring stories. It's one that always attracts our attention. The story of Jesus calming the storm on the sea. And the evangelists found it so compelling that all four of them, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, found a place in their gospels for this story. And of course, there's symbolic meaning to the different things that happen in the story, and then that's common, with our gospels, with Scripture in general. Jesus is in the boat with his disciples, and that usually is equated to our church. The church being the boat, the bark of Peter, if you would call it. And this boat is making its way through the waters of history. In the gospel and in the history of our church, storms arise, don't they? And it doesn't take a genius to realize that this boat that is our Catholic Church has and always will be pounded by storms. Heresies and schisms, reformations, attacks from other faiths, persecutions, reformations, apostasy, martyrdom, scandals, abuses. These are just some of the storms that we've had to weather in our church. What is interesting in the story is what Jesus is doing. He's asleep in the back of the boat. Kind of sounds like he doesn't care. So the church is falling apart and you're sleeping, Jesus? We could use some help here. Kind of sounds a little like what Job was saying to God. Some of the church fathers, though, have an explanation for this. They say that the sleeping Christ stands for the silent power of God in our church. Kind of like when you come to adoration, if you've ever come to adoration. It's silent, it's quiet, but you feel the presence of God. You feel the power of God. You can just sense it. And that same power of God is also put in us as we receive the sacraments. And once again, receiving the sacrament of Holy Eucharist today, we will take part in that silent power of God. The storms of our life will always come and frighten us. And when this happens, we have a choice. We can choose to live in chaos and anxiety, or we can choose to live with the power of God that is in us and trust Him. With trust and with faith, we will find peace. And we'll find safety. And it won't matter how bad that storm is raging outside us. Unfortunately, today, many people live shallow lives. They have no depth. They are indifferent to God. They could care less about God's role in their lives. They're gobbled up in the materialistic, hedonistic society that gets so many of them. So what happens to them when something bad happens, when a storm comes their way? They become fearful. They become anxious. They're not grounded in God. And sometimes it even paralyzes them, much like the disciples were paralyzed with fear in the boat. They flail about when the storms come by. Think back on a time in your life when you went through some hard stuff, when that bad storm hit you in your life. It's easy to remember those. We always do. Sometimes it's easier to remember going through a bad situation than the good ones. But think back on it. How did you respond during that personal storm you had? Did you just worry about it and wring your hands and Get all nervous? Did you lose sleep? Did you question God like Job did? Or did you turn to him in prayer and ask for his Spirit to kindle in us and to help us guide through tough times? There will always be storms in our life. The point is, how are we going to respond to them? Are we going to respond with trust? Are we going to respond with faith? I mean, that's what Jesus said to his disciples. Why are you afraid? Why do you not have faith yet? You would think they would have after witnessing so many miracles, but we're fickle people. It's so easy for us to lose our faith and to lose our trust and to fall back into fear. We do fear the storms of life, and maybe that's because we trust in ourselves more than we trust in God. Well, if we do subscribe to that and trust only in our own ability to get out of the tough spots, well, then I think we do have every reason to be afraid. We don't know why God permits these storms. We don't know why he permits evil. We don't know why he permits suffering in the world. We may question him, but we need to trust in him. We need that trust like a little child has in its parents, knowing that his parents will always take care of him, will always do what's best for him, will always do what's right for him. And our God, who loves us so much more, is the best of parents. More storms are going to come our way for both you and me. So when the next one hits, let's wake up that sleeping power of Jesus that's inside each of us and use that power to increase our faith and our trust. He's gotten us through tough spots this far, and I know he will continue to do so in the future.